Okay, welcome everybody to another Future Teacher Reborn session. For those not familiar with Future Teacher, the resource where you found the registration form, and we leave it live until the end of the session because people sign up late, is where we make available all of our previous sessions, all of our future sessions, and all the recordings and so on. So you can use the menu or just use the arrow keys to navigate through that resource. At the top, you'll find a bit about the project and our principles, and about the regular host and the next phase, and then sharing and social media and so on. The registration form, and then we have this little panel that welcomes you to the session, and then some information and presentation links for our guest speakers today. And then further down, you'll find registrations for previous sessions, but also the next session on the designing appropriate assessments. We'll cover that at the end again, but I'll stop my sharing and hand over to Lillian, who will introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Ron. I'm here to introduce James Kieft, who I have known for many years. He's been in the circuit, sharing a lot of great tips on learning technology, really useful tips on Microsoft, but also Google, etc. James has worked in FE for many years, but he's also worked as a staff developer, learning technology manager. And so he's going to bring all these years of experience in his session about how to actually keep up to date with technology and how to encourage colleagues to keep up to date with technology. So yeah, over to James.
Thank you, Lillian, and good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see everyone. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. In rehearsals, this worked well, so fingers crossed. It will be the same here. So hopefully that is visible.
Yep, fabulous.
Yeah, so where I thought I'd start was just talking a little bit about who I work for. So I work for Activate Learning. It's a group of further education colleges based in the southeast. We have 8 college campuses spread over Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Surrey. And as Lillian mentioned, my role is teaching, learning and development manager. So I very much look after teacher development, and that involves looking after new teacher induction, running our teacher development programs, and also running our award in education and training. And alongside that, I also do some development of all staff's digital skills. So I run lots of digital sessions on how they can develop their skills further. So one of Activate's key elements is our learning philosophy, and that's brain, motivation, and emotion. And what that states is that for learning to be successful, there needs to be a combination of brain, motivation, and emotion. So if the learner's motivation's not there, or they're not feeling safe and secure, their emotion's not there, then they're not in the prime position for learning. So we have that combination of brain, motivator, emotion, and all of those elements need to be in place for learning to work effectively. And I thought this was a nice framework for which to start to talk about developing digital skills and maintaining interest and encouraging colleagues to continue to develop and keep up to date with ever-evolving teaching practices. So I thought I'd start with the motivation aspect. And I think just like our students, there's a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivating factors when we look at our staff. So, and it seems to vary from staff depending on their experience. Sometimes you end up with what you'd expect those more experienced who maybe have been in the profession longer are less keen to utilize technology, whereas those who are newer to it are more keen to. But I find actually it's down to the individual. And as I think everyone on the call knows, it's all to do with confidence. It's confidence is the key part. But from a motivation aspect, it's making sure that that we're tapping into what motivates them. So I think one key linking strand that joins both further education and higher education and all forms of education is the desire to enable those students to progress to the next step of the journey, whatever that may be. And I think by tying in any of the benefits, and not focusing necessarily on technology, but focusing on the task that you need to do in the sense of pedagogy or whatever it may be, you're shifting that motivation. I think I've always found that if I start with technology, there's a group of colleagues that I'm putting off. So I find by actually focusing on in case of teachers on pedagogy and supporting learners and what they do in the classroom, or just group service colleagues focusing on the types of tasks they need to do and highlighting the benefits in those, I get buy-in. So I always start with the task or the teaching as opposed to the technology, and that way I'm pushing on an open door. So and for all colleagues, it's about signposting where are those benefits and how that benefits them. So as a teacher, how does it benefit them potentially with learner engagement? For all colleagues, is there a time-saving element linked to that? And then I think it's worth setting the context. So as Lily mentioned, work in further education, and this always makes me feel very old, but our learners have never known a world without a smartphone. So it's their context around technology and how they see it and their expectations around technology is very different from some of our own. So when we're thinking about technology and we're looking and I'm working with teachers and talking about engaging learners, they have an expectation that technology is the norm. So it's about, and that does provide some challenges because for some of our learners, they've not yet developed that social awareness of when technology is appropriate and when it's not, and when the use of a phone is appropriate and when it's not. However, if used appropriately, there's a whole wealth of different types of tools and activities that can be used to increase engagement and have added benefit for the learners. So let's sort of jump back a little bit and just talk about our approach. So what we've tried to do, and as I've hopefully alluded to already, is we've tried to focus on skills development. So we've focused on developing skills as opposed to focusing on a specific application. We found for many years, and I've worked with technology, learning technology for many years, our previous approach was very much on certain tools, and we'd focus on using this tool and that tool, and the tool took prominence over the skill or what it was being used for. And that meant you got colleagues confused, certainly teaching colleagues confused. Well, should they use the VLE or should they use something else? So we decided that actually we wanted to focus on skills. And this also meant when we're looking at the development of our learners, instead of focusing on specific applications, we were focusing on skills that they could use. And we found this resonated with a lot more staff, that they weren't confused about which app or tool they should be using. It was on the tasks. So we came up with this idea of the 6 C's, and these were skills that would really focus teachers' use on how they're using those skills and how they can develop their learner skills and also how they can develop their own skills. So the 6 C's are listed there, all linked to the types of activities we think all learners need to be doing. And we found that had a real prominence, and we started that process with doing an initial diagnostic and highlighting where they were. And there were various levels: emerging, developing, practicing, and innovating. And then we had that development pathway linked to each of those. And we found this was a nice way to get them to engage with it. What we also did is for curriculum staff, we highlighted how those skills could be developed within specific areas of learner practice. So if you're a hairdressing teacher, how could you use this? How would that work for you? If you're in construction, how could you integrate this? So really contextualizing the examples and making it easy for them to use. Obviously, can't talk about technology nowadays without mentioning AI. And the use of AI, again, with my sessions, I've tried to it's very easy just to throw AI in, and I can guarantee I'll get more staff attending. But I've tried to focus on pedagogy and tasks used within learning and activities linked to teaching and learning. And then that's been the headline. And then if there is an opportunity for AI to be used to assist teachers in that activity, that's come later as opposed to being first thing. And then our digital team, and we're very fortunate, we've got a great digital team. And they've integrated it into Canvas assignments. So the benefit to that means that you're getting a helping hand. So what happens is you click on the AI box, and it suggests, having reviewed the assignment against the criteria you've set, it suggests the strengths and weaknesses of that assignment. So again, it's just providing that helping hand. It's not telling them what to say. It's just reassuring them about what's been submitted, and it just aids them and builds their confidence in assessing, but also speeds up that process. And then when it comes to the wider digital skills, it's about starting with the familiar, having that initial focus on just a small selection of apps, but really highlighting the wider functionality so we can build confidence on using those tools. So for those who are reluctant potentially to engage with stuff, start with something familiar. And where I like to start is, or what I tend to do is I run lots of workshops. I use infographics and tutorial videos to show them how to do that. But I start with apps that they're familiar with. So we're starting with apps such as PowerPoint and Forms, because they're familiar with those. So instead of just talking about apps which maybe they haven't come across, such as Kahoot and others, start with those tools that they're familiar with. We're an Office 365 organization, so we focus on those tools, but highlight how they can be used in an interactive way. So with PowerPoint, it's looking at how they can use it to create activities they can display at the front of the room to add some interactivity to their lesson, using the draw feature in PowerPoint to annotate, to get the students to come up and annotate slides, to have maybe matching pairs activities, again, using the drawing feature where students come up to the front of the room to match and make notes on the board as they go. So it's using tools that they're familiar with. And when it comes to students, again, similar sort of thing. I've created a little template for infographics and getting the students to collaboratively generate an infographic or contribute to an infographic as the form of note taking. So again, it's building their confidence and highlighting what they can do, linked to our 6 C's, but tools that are much more familiar to them. And then as a starter, introducing them into how they can engage students with their mobile phones, again, using an easy to access and easily recognizable product such as Microsoft Forms, and highlighting how they can be using it. Things such as the present feature, which brings up that anonymized responses, is really powerful. It has a word cloud feature, which is really nice. And then again, focusing on the pedagogy of using it. So around the initial response, and then using follow-up questions to engage with it. So it's, as new teachers, it can be quite daunting to work out the plethora of tools and then how you can use them. So by going back to the basics of teaching and learning, and then suggesting tools that they're familiar with, we seem to have got greater engagement with the process. But as I say, just as I mentioned with AI, we always start with the pedagogy. We start with the teaching and learning activities, and then how we can use either AI or how we can use these technology to further engagement of learners, or to be able to utilize some of that useful information to be able to identify progress being made. I couldn't do one of these sessions, and I apologize for the shameless plug. I have a little YouTube channel that I've been running now for probably 8 years. And I found that for lots of staff, we're coming back to that building confidence. it's about showing them. And I appreciate there's many ed tech YouTubers out there, but I found there's a real power to having videos that were created with a greater focus on the task that they were doing within FE, and having a video produced by someone you know, I think has a level of engagement. And obviously lots of ed tech YouTubers are American, and they're lovely people, the Americans. I hold nothing against them, but sometimes the context or the scenario isn't right. So having something that highlights what they can do in more of a context that's recognizable to them helps with engagement. So you can see one of those was just simple little things like using the morph transition tool in PowerPoint so that you can get an anagram to do an automatic reveal. Small little things which just build confidence, add an element of professionalism in the lesson, but a great way to, and a more engaging way to develop students' English skills. So those are the sorts of approaches that we've taken. And as I say, I found it really beneficial that if you engage with them, just stepping back a few of my slides, if you engage with what they're trying to do and focus on that, and then start to talk about the technology, it's a much more beneficial process, and the engagement has been much greater. So I've really found it's hugely beneficial. I think we're very fortunate in that we've got a separate a separate digital team who can focus on the AI aspect and really embedding it within our practice. So I hope that's been interested. I've seen lots of comments appearing, so I'll stop my screen share there.
Thank you very much, James. That was really good. That was, yeah, that definitely stimulated a lot of ideas for a few people. So feel free to reply to people in the chat. And in the meantime, we'll move on to our next speakers before we have a discussion at the end.
Great. So I would like to introduce Emily and Dee from Manchester Metropolitan University. And they've spent many years kind of considering how to ensure that teaching and learning at the university is effective and engaging. But one of the critical things is not just teaching and learning being effective and engaging, but being consistent across the university, across different faculties and so on, and taking a university-wide approach at creating some of the confidence and skills that James has talked about. So they will beautifully supplement that kind of individualistic approach of people being able to go and look at individual videos, get examples, by looking at what might take place within an institution in a strategic way. So over to Emily and Dee to talk about their Delta project.
Thank you very much, Alistair. So as just said, we are digital education specialists. We're part of a team based at Manchester Metropolitan University. We're going to chat today about engaging our students in active learning community through Delta. Now, Delta is the digitally enhanced learning, teaching and assessment, and we'll talk a bit more about that within our presentation. So at ManMet, we have an education strategy that we're working towards, and within it, we want to deliver an outstanding student experience. So our students belong and they're part of a transformational active learning community. And the active learning side of it is very important to us, where the students are becoming more engaged and contributors to their own learning. So we've got this lovely model which shows on the outside, we've got our exceptional campus connection to place. So we want the students to feel very connected and feel like they belong, and that it defines our sense of place and learning within the university. We then have an inclusive and innovative community along with our supportive community. And it's very important that students feel part of the university. We're a very big university. We want the students to feel like they belong and that they matter. So these three characteristics reflect our values based on our educational approach. Then we come along to our 5 interrelated key drivers. So these support the students on their journey and help them realize their potential. So within that, we're shaping our future-focused curriculum and delivery. We want it that the students are always thinking forward, that the courses they take are providing them with the best options for their future. We're committed to digital enhancement of their educational experience, which is Delta and the area that we're going to talk about in more detail today. We evolve their broader student experience. It's not only about learning, it's the entire student experience that they receive. We want to enhance their future prospects. So whilst they're at university, they have the end goal of what employment they're going into, and we want to be able to provide them with the skills that take them into that employment, whether it's directly related to their course or wider skills within that. And we have an ongoing commitment to investing in the development of our outstanding staff. So that's really where our digital education team comes in. We're here to support staff, whether they be academic or professional service, in their digital delivery within the university. So for that could be their own digital skills that they can then pass on to their students. It can be to do with how they embed digital into their assessments. We've got lots of different areas that we cover within this. So with Delta, which is our digitally enhanced learning, teaching and assessment, the main area in it is this flexible active learning. So the students work collaboratively or individually on building their education. And it not only helps with their education, it also helps socially among each other, because we have students who prefer to be on campus. We have students who prefer to work with their learning online, and these can come together and become social with each other, which all helps create this sense of belonging. We also want to give the students appropriate choices, because the students these days are very different to the students 10 years ago. And since COVID, we've had quite a shift in the types of students we have and the demands that they have outside of the university. So Delta aims to be able to bring their learning so that it's more appropriate for them and they can make choices within that. So within Delta, we have 6 principles of digital flexibility. So we did quite a lot of research into different sector-wide reports like JISC, Advanced HE, and also our own NSS and ISS surveys as well. So we really listened to the student voice whenever Delta was being put together. So it's really what, where, when, and how to learn, which is balanced with the student life. So through using digital, our VLE is Moodle. So that's kind of like our central core that everything else feeds off. And we like that the students are able to prepare in advance for their live teaching sessions. So any tasks they need to do or any presentations that were going to be available would be put onto Moodle prior to the live teaching session. The students can catch up independently if they miss a live session. So we have both lecture recording and also any notes or apps that would happen during the session, the students would be able to see those. So they're able to go back and look through lecture recordings and different things in their own time. And we digitally capture active learning experiences to work on beyond the live sessions. So we don't want the learning to just finish in the live session. We want it to be able to go beyond there and for each of the weeks to link together. They're able to work through the learning at their own pace. So depending on their demands of, they might be carers, they might have a job, they won't feel like they're missing out, that they can fit this learning in. We co-construct digital spaces in which to work with their peers. So again, this comes back to the belonging and feeling part of the university, and that it's not all didactically taught, that the students are contributing to their learning within sessions. And they can choose the topic or format for appropriate elements of assessment. So we could have that a student will have an assessment and they may be able to pick different formats that they would like to present that assessment within. So the first three really focus on enabling students to organise their learning within their lives. And then numbers 4 to 6 are linked to designing flexible active learning using the digital tools that we have. I'm just going to pass over to Dee now, who's going to go into it in a bit more detail.
Well, when it comes to actual learning spaces, we have a thing called the Learning Spaces Framework, which is based on what the university provides for students to learn, whether it's on campus or whether it's online learning spaces. And during the pandemic, we and most universities went to Teams, of course. But on campus, what we're trying to provide these spaces where students can still carry on their learning if they're not in the classroom. So informal settings, you have lecture theatres in the classrooms and the labs. While the informal, we have something called the Spanish Steps in the new buildings, and you can have cafes and private booths. But also, because Moodle is an integral part of any student learning within the university, all resources are uploaded in there, whether it's a lecture capture or whether they've used a Padlet wall or something like that's all uploaded on Moodle. But of course, they can also be doing collaborative work using Teams, or if they're doing something on Office 365, which all the students have access to here. The aim of that is ultimately so it can move seamlessly between these spaces. So, for example, if you were looking at as a design process, this is how we would go around designing this. You set the students in class group tasks, and we are concentrating using Miro, which we'll explain just a few minutes more in exactly what we do with it. But we'll showcase Miro here, but it's the same for whichever technology you were using. So you set their in class group tasks. They can go away, carry on working on that aspect of what you provided for them in terms of the remit. You can come back into the classroom the next session and review the contribution the students have made. And you can have a debrief on that to see if there's actually understanding on what the concepts, etc. are. You can then centrally put that on Moodle, so you ensure that the students can have this place where they can go and find these instructions. And then if you wish to use Teams, of course, you can then integrate it into Teams and make it available there, and also have a meeting on there with them to discuss any outcomes. You finally end up with a full debrief, which hopefully will reinforce what the students have been asked to do. And in this case, Miro itself sits across the whole seamless integration of the spaces we've got. At the university, we have 6 apps for teaching and learning, and these are institutionally provided. So we have Nearpod, Kahoot, Menti, Miro, Menti, Padlet. Did I miss any? I don't think I missed any. So we've got 6 altogether. These have Vivox, sorry. These are all provided by the university for staff. So there's no cost to them. We've institutionally provided for them. And what we've tried to do is make sure that the process is simpler. So if you want to use one of these apps, you can contact us. the digital education team, and we will assist you in designing what you want to do with it. We've ensured that we refer to GDPR, digital security accessibility, and these are the links that staff are provided with. We ensure that accessibility is also a central part of anything the academics do with the students when it comes to using the apps, and to ensure there are alternative ways for students with personal learning plans to access these technologies, or if there is another way of submitting what they're doing. And also that we have specialist people in our team who they can contact for further information and help. Considering the licenses last year, so we had 3,809 licenses provided to staff between 24-25 up to January 25. And as you can see on the breakdown now, Miro is the newest technology we've used. But you can see that the numbers there in terms of Padlet, Vivox, and Menti are the highest. And in terms of engagement, I'm just going to read some figures we had out released yesterday. We have 3,809 licenses in use for the different apps, 1,800 staff using at least one of the apps. We've had 28,000 sessions using the apps, and we've had 484,000 student interactions. So it's a big part of the student learning, particularly in terms of student engagement. The feedback we've received has been really good in terms of its active learning. It's part of the students' engagements. They like the technology. They want to have a voice. They don't want to, as Emily was saying before, they just don't want to be taught. They want to be part of the experience of what they're learning. And it's also, we think, providing the voice to the quiet student, which is something that isn't always possible when you're doing live teaching. So the aim of the technologies, I hope, is giving that person who's quieter in the classroom to actually express themselves. And then I think that sums it up at the bottom where it says, using up has allowed me to find my voice and encourage participation. I think that's one of the things that I think we really try and enforce, that it gives the opportunity to learn when you're not integrating as you think you should be. We'd like to leave you with one question, and it is, how replicable would this approach be in your institution? Thank you, Alistair.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much. And I love the, sorry, I'm just trying to switch my video on, which it won't go on, so you know what I look like. So, yeah, thank you very much. I loved that little example you gave, designing an activity and leading through those different opportunities and the reflective paths backwards to debriefs, etc. So we've got questions that have come in from James's session, and we've got questions from Emily and Dee's session. So Teresa, I think you were looking at some of the questions.
I'll
Lillian, yeah.
I'll summarize some of the questions in case Teresa has a panic on. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to our three presenters. They come from slightly different angles, but it's a very rich area to prompt discussion. James, I think you've already answered this in the chat, but I'll just mention that Ron asked what tools you use to create and collaborate on the creation of infographics, and you say Piktochart or PowerPoint. Is there anything that guides your choice of those tools, James?
Very much like I said in my presentation, PowerPoint, because I find it's that easy in for those nervous staff. It's a tool they're familiar with. So I've created a template, a very basic long form template. So it looks like an infographic. I've shared that with staff. I personally, for my infographics, use Piktochart. I use it for all sorts. I use it for my short form video content. I use it for picking out I can't remember what it's called, the subtitles for my videos. So I use it for lots of things. But yeah, that's what I use.
Brilliant.
I have used Visio. I don't get on so well with it. For me, I don't find the interface as well. I haven't played with it recently.
That's a good question from Gillian. Do you find, how does this explosion of AI tools impact the choice of tools that you use?
It depends. It varies from tool to tool. So quizzes is one that we use quite a lot. We have the advantage. They've allowed FE to be classed as a school, so we can get free access to a reasonably unrestricted tool in quizzes. For those not familiar with quizzes, it's very similar to Kahoot. Actually, it's probably has a combination of factors of Kahoot and Mentimeter, because you can do a present feature in there as well. And some of them have it very well integrated. So the AI features within quizzes are beautifully integrated. Some of the other AI features, I find sometimes I'm not sure what value they bring. And as I referenced in my session, sometimes I think AI has just been added in as a carrot to try and hook people onto the platform. But the way it's been resolved it's not been fully resolved yet.
James had a question at the end of his session, and we do encourage our presenters. And just as James had a question, Emily and Dee had a question too at the end of theirs. But I haven't seen any replies yet to either of those questions. So I do wonder, just going back to our audience, James's question was, how would you add some interactivity to your presentations, or maybe how do you add interactivity to to the content? And when we say presentations, we can take it broader than just PowerPoint. How do you add interactivity to your learning content? So that's one question if you're involved in direct delivery. If you're not so involved in direct delivery, but perhaps more involved in working in the way that Emily and Dee have, then maybe their question, which was how replicable would, have I found it exactly? Can't find it exactly, but it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Emily or Dee, I think it was how replicable would that centralized approach be within your organization? So depending on where you are, individual person at the chalk face or somebody one step back looking at strategy, I'd just be interested in seeing the range of experiences and expertise that we might have from this community. So do take a moment or two and pop something in the text chat if you've got things you could add to that.
So one of the questions was, how do we kind of ensure this goes throughout the university? We have different faculties. So Emily works in science and engineering. I work in art and humanities. And within the faculties, there are what's called Delta leads, academic staff who are actively engaged in contributing to the development of these tools. So the staff use them as part of the student learning experience. And then we try and showcase good practice throughout the university.
Okay, that's very helpful. You talked about 1,800 staff had engaged with one of those tools.
Yes.
Can you give us a sense of context? 1,800 out of how many? What?
We have approximately 4,000 to 4,500 staff.
Okay, so about coming up a third to a half.
Yes, nearly, yes, yeah.
Have used those tools. I think that's quite impressive for a level of engagement.
And we also find, because we probably, like most places, started off with everybody was just using whatever app suited them for what they needed. And we find that apps could change their terms and conditions, and there was a cost, and everything wasn't necessarily supported because everybody didn't have knowledge of all of the apps that were being used. So we find by centralizing it on these 6 apps, and we know we're very lucky to have got the support to do that, but it enables the Institute to support what staff are doing. We can really concentrate on developing what staff are doing as well, and staff have the security that they're not changing. If they invest into something, they can continue to develop with it.
Just if I come in on Emily's point, we have a similar model in that we have, I didn't mention it in my presentation, but we have a set of tools, and we've done as you've done, and we wanted the consistency. We also wanted to make sure that the tools with regards to the data they stored was appropriate and they met the college's guidelines for GDPR. So we do have a set of tools that we suggest colleagues use. So Quizzes is one of those. The other one that started to gain popularity, which we've done a trial with, is its name's going to escape me now. Is Bluekit, which is probably aimed at slightly younger learners, but there's a gamification element if they answer the question right, and that's proven popular. But yeah, we've followed the model you've got in saying, look, this is the set of tools that we recommend you use, and then we've asked them to ensure that they log on with their college ID. So we don't get people logging on with personal IDs to some of those tools separately.
I think the point you make, James, about consistency is very important, because the students want consistency. So if they already know how to use one of these 6 apps and it's used in another module, it's much easier for them than having to relearn it.
And
Yeah,
that's,
absolutely.
that's what came out of one of the ISSs, that they were going to different teaching spaces and things were being done differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would say, well, person A is doing that, you're not doing that. So now we have that consistency across the university. And with Miro, I could say with Miro, which is one of the new technologies, Emily and I are the specialists supporting that. We've been pushing how Miro can be used within education, even though it's a business tool.
So I'm really interested in the whole range. There's loads of stuff in the chat about the different things that people are doing with their different tools. It'd be great if we could kind of cross-fertilize those different ideas. I was particularly intrigued by the use of Miro. I was talking about Miro recently in Glasgow School of Art, I think. Yeah, Glasgow School of Art. Corrie talking there about recreating the studio layout, and then they can comment and share on one another's work through Miro, posting them as images. Lillian, you asked a question there about the accessibility. Do you want to highlight that?
Yeah, I was just wondering if before you recommend to colleagues or to students any tools or anything they're going to use for teaching and learning, do you actually start from that accessibility angle? So like with Miro, I was wondering, I believe kind of like Padlet, it's like you're almost adding post-it notes to a board and you can kind of move it around, which may or may not have some accessibility issues. It's good for some people and it's less good for other people. And what's your thought process before you decide whether to encourage someone to use a particular tool?
I think it revolves around sometimes the subject they're doing. Yeah, and also because it's a lot of these technologies now have inbuilt accessibility checkers, it helps a great deal. And from our experience with Miro, it's got an inbuilt accessibility checker. So when you create your board, that's the first thing you do is check that. So a colleague came to me this morning and he wanted to use it with students. And I said to him, have you checked the accessibility? I said, let me check it for you. It had 189 errors on it.
Wow.
I said, I think, you need to go back to the drawing board and make sure you've covered all that, and also provide, as I was saying in our presentation, provide the alternative way for the student to engage so they don't feel left out.
Yeah, we do check, we do look at. I mean, I think that's part of the reason we've referenced some of the existing tools. I know it was mentioned in the chat that sometimes we forget the great features that are built into the tools we use regularly. And I think that things like the live presentation feature within PowerPoint that brings up subtitles and will allow them to choose a subtitle in a language that's their native tongue is hugely powerful. And then Quizzes recently has added adjustments where you can set specific adjustments for each learner. So when they bring up the quiz, it knows who they are, and it will change either the appearance of the information or it will read it to them. So really powerful adjustments to cater for their specific needs. So it's hugly powerful. But for me, I think that's where things like the Microsoft suite of apps has great functionality built in. We're very fortunate in using Canvas, and that works with Immersive Reader as well, which it adds an added benefit.
James, for people that haven't come across Quizzes, do you want to just put a link that people can have a
Yeah, we'll do.
follow up look at.
Can you say, James, we have, do you load all your videos onto YouTube?
Sorry?
Do you load all your videos onto YouTube?
Yes.
Because internally within the university, we have something called MMUtube, which is a university-based video repository. So if you create any videos you wish to share with anybody internally or even externally, they can upload it to our own platform. So you're not doing an external share.
Yeah, we have eStream. I've always put them out publicly for the wider sector. And my organization, I mean, there are occasional times where I record a video and just share it internally because it's very specific to the organization. But I set up my channel independently of doing it for work. So it's sort of just become something I do, which colleagues then benefit from. But I like the fact it goes out to the world. I've had some lovely comments from people, and I naively forget YouTube is international. I get comments from I was having a conversation with someone who was in Winnipeg in Canada, and she was saying how that she'd used one of the techniques I'd suggested. So yeah, it varies depending on what I'm doing and who it's for.
Talk about variation. One of the questions I popped into the chat for Emily and Dee was, do you find different levels of engagement in different schools? Or I know you've got a Delta rep in every school, or faculty, whatever term you use. Do you find that there are some areas where you get easy traction and other areas where it's much more difficult? And if so, what do you attribute those differences to?
Yeah, there's definitely differences. Yeah. Some people just like what they like and it works for them, and there's no need for them to change it. Some other people might, because we always start with the pedagogy before the technology. So somebody may come to us with something, an idea they have or something they want to do, but they don't know how to go about it. And we could recommend and support them through that. But we don't use technology for the sake of it. It has to fit with what needs to be done. And some of it comes down to subject as well. Some subjects just sit with certain apps better than others. But I think that's what we find with Padlet, because it's so universal and it's quite intuitive to use. It would be our highest used app, and it's the one both staff and students find the easiest to use and to integrate in. So if somebody was starting off, we'd probably start them off looking at Padlet. And then we have people who know exactly what they want to do, how to do it, and will fly with things. We have all different levels, from people starting out to people who are expert in areas. And it all just depends on what the individual wants and the program want to get out of it, really.
Is there any kind of end goal where you're you're kind of aiming at staff or perhaps you know, your different Moodle courses all having a certain minimum level of engagement, pedagogical engagement through digital means, rather than, I mean, not technology for the sake of it, but you know, I'm just trying to think, if somebody in a department just thought, actually, I'm not bothered about this, would there be any pressure on them to think or to change their approaches?
If the approach they have is working, and the students are happy and learning from it, then not necessarily. We do have a Moodle baseline where there are certain things we would want to appear within our VLE, but not for the apps per se.
Yeah.
But what we do tend to find is, because the students want the consistency, if they have something in one module, they tend to like to see it in another. So a lot of the research that we've done into it has come through student voice.
Okay, that's good.
Great. I think Alistair had a question for Dee and Emily about how MMU ensures buy-in from staff into the Delta aims.
We've done a lot of promotion for Delta across the university. We've had a Delta Day where we had over 150 staff attend. We've now become a creative Adobe Creative Campus as well. So that's added to the additional tools they can have, the students and for staff. And again, as Emily was saying, it depends on the subject and the area you want. Not all areas will want to use Adobe Creative Campus, while more of the creative arts areas like design will want to use it. So we've provided that opportunity that if you want to use it, we can show you a good example of how it's been done with these 6 apps. And maybe that will kind of tweak what you think you can do with yours. So there's no pressure on anybody. We try and be very soft, use cotton wool with them and ensure that they're happy to integrate the technology within how they teach and how the students learn.
Can you give any hints for people? We've had some comments where people saying, oh, it's great to have a suite of tools, but we could only afford 1 or 2 of those. Have you got any hints and tips as to how you sold to budget holders the idea that you should have, have that level of support for licenses? Because I think that's quite an achievement.
Some of it I think comes out of the ISS comments we had and the NSS comments that they were a bit tired of being just talked to.
Yeah.
And of course the pandemic changed how students were taught. So when they came back on campus, they didn't want the same approach anymore. So I think that helped in terms of trying to obtain a suite. We've been really fortunate, unlike a lot of universities, that we've had the vendor support, the IT support, and our leadership team have all supported this implementation across the university. And we realize that some of the technologies we may not use in the future because their use might just drop altogether, such as Nearpod or Kahoot. We may not use that in the future, and technology will change and something else will come along. But what we've tried to offer is that let's go with this, see how it works. Is it working well? Yes, it is. Our staff engage with it. Yes, they are. Do the students enjoy it? And all the experiences we've come across, the students are enjoying it.
Yeah.
And it's also helping the students with their skills for future employment as well, especially the likes of Miro and Adobe Express, where they have those skills that they can take forward into work.
I think that's a very important point, actually, that, a lot of our work is about preparing learners for the world of work. So that modeling is really important. And thinking about the title of our webinar, one practice students complain about bitterly is having to use authentication to log into their apps. I'm sure we're all in that situation. And I keep having to say to the students, we have to do it too, I don't know anyone in any workplace that doesn't have to authenticate now to get onto the systems, but students think it's being done at them. So that's yet another, it's one of those weird things about skills, isn't it? Skills to use and pivot to different learning techniques employed by different lecturers, but also skills to then understand that these are all necessary ways to learn for the world of work. Any comments?
Well, I was going to say, Lillian, we're aware that not all universities have the support we've had. So there are free versions of Miro in terms of an educational plan you can sign up for and get some, free boards. Same with Padlet, you can have a free account. So there is that availability out there to use these technologies. But what we've discovered, especially with Miro, that because business is using it, I think it's a great tool to have when you are leaving as a graduate, because you can put that down that you're using a technology that is used in industry from various different options. And we were looking at, and there's 100 million users of Miro out there in the world. So there's a lot of people using it. So to me, it's a great example of a tool that can be used across international spaces.
Ron had put something in, and Ron, do you want to sort of say a little bit about your message on the what one thing?
Sorry, Alistair. Yes, I noticed that a few people were obviously having to leave before we finish, or at least before we formally finish. So I put in the text chat, before you do leave, just share what one thing you will do as a result of what you've seen and heard today. We normally ask attendees to share that and to thank the guest speakers for what they've covered and their efforts, and everyone really for sharing all the ideas and resources that they've shared via the text chat.
I just
So
want, sorry.
you go.
Oh, I just want to summarize. Gillian mentioned in the chat that we're all guilty of trying to introduce new exciting tools when an existing tool may have a good enough function. And Teresa says, yeah, we're all guilty of the magpie effect. And I thought that was a really nice word that I'll take away with me, you know, that it's true. I think we went through a phase a while back where you'll all remember these graphics with a wheel of apps.
Oh yes, yeah.
And there'll be millions of apps, and you'll be like, and half of them won't even exist now. And moving into HE from FE, things were so constrained. I felt like I wasn't being given the freedom to use the best tool. And at that point at uni, we had Turning Point, which I hated. And then some lecturers were using Menti, which I preferred. And luckily, we now use Menti, which is much more flexible because it's on the web. So it's like things change all the time, but the main point is that we can't rest on our laurels, can we? The main skill really is to understand something like Mentimeter allows me to engage with my learners for this particular pedagogical purpose. If I can't have Mentimeter, how else can I engage my students in that pedagogical purpose? And it could just be reverting back to a simple PowerPoint question and a show of hands, but that purpose is still doable no matter what technology we use. And I often find when lecturers come to me to say, I want to make a very interactive self-learning tutorial, but I want it to be interactive, I often say, have you not thought of just putting the content nicely spaced in a Google form where there are a few pages of content followed by a page with like a survey form, but you're engaging and you're getting feedback on how learners are progressing through as well. And it's surprising how few people use Google Forms in that way.
We found staff push the boundaries of what they can do with these technologies. For example, Padlet was used for submitting portfolios by the students, which we'd never thought of, but it worked. You know, that was the point. And we're now looking at using Miro as a portfolio tool because we don't have an institutional tool. So it's that, can you push the boundaries, as you just said, Lydia, can you push the boundaries further with these technologies?
I love the concept of pedagogical leapfrog, and it's the kind of thing where, you know, James might show you something really clever that you could do that you thought, I didn't know that you could do that, but now that I know that you could do that, I would do that, but I would tweak it in this way for my students in this context, and suddenly somebody's gone from zero to hero because you put that kind of that catalyst in the middle of showing them something, a little technological trick or tool within something they already use that allows them to suddenly just see opportunities that they didn't see before because they didn't know about the technology, and you didn't see before because you didn't know about the teaching context. So that pedagogical leapfrog bit is just fantastic, and I love it, seeing what other people are doing.
That's fabulous. It's 2 o'clock. I'm going to stop the recording here.